Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, Los Angeles Unified School District is about to get even stricter with its COVID-19 mitigation requirements. The country's second largest public school district will force students to wear non-cloth masks that have a nose wire, even while they are outside or playing sports. LA is also slated to add a vaccination requirement for all students, which will take effect January 1st, 2023. The district's mask policy was updated on its website late last week. It states that masking will be required at all times, indoors and outdoors. It is required that all students wear well-fitting, non-cloth masks with a nose wire. Staff will have to wear surgical-grade masks. And the policy includes no exceptions and no acknowledgement that masks have proven to be disruptive to various educational, social, and physical activities. In fact, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have admitted that masks could make it more difficult for young children to learn how to read, which is what they're in school to do. Several months ago, the CDC quietly revised its masking guidance and encouraged schools to let these students wear cloth masks or even transparent masks. We didn't hear about that, but it happened. Many other students find it difficult, of course, to exercise and participate in sports while wearing masks. It makes little sense to require young people to keep masking up under these circumstances when outside the school setting, there's practically zero expectation that people wear masks while exercising outdoors, even in highly COVID-19 compliant cities. Students are virtually alone in that they are required by the authorities relevant to them to do vigorous, constant masking. Even American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten realizes that it can be difficult to understand what a person is saying when they're wearing a mask, which is why she removed hers in order to be heard at a conference in November. She was caught doing that by people on Twitter. Perhaps there are circumstances where students would have difficulty hearing their teachers or their classmates. Lenore Skenazy, my colleague at Reason Magazine, recently interviewed a 7th grade health teacher about the toll that pandemic restrictions have taken on her students. One of the main issues was that masks inhibited communication between the kids. And non-cloth masks are not the only burden coming to LA schools. The district also has tentative plans to implement a vaccine mandate beginning next year after previously delaying its implementation in the face of widespread resistance. Well, that resistance will now be crushed. Legislation proposed by State Senator Richard Pan would require students throughout the state to get vaccinated. His bill expands upon a previous mandate and eliminates the personal belief exception. Legislators have the ability to pass laws to make our communities safe, including increasing vaccination rates to keep schools open and safe, he said in a statement. Young people, however, are already substantially safe from the worst effects of COVID-19, severe disease and death. Getting vaccinated is the right choice for many of them, but other families might have some reasonable concerns in some cases. We've talked about myocarditis risks on the show quite a bit. There are other issues as well. The vaccines are a good choice for many, if not most people. Let me be perfectly clear about that. But that's not going to cover every single case. Mandating that all students get the vaccine effectively takes choice away from families, since the alternative, permanent remote education, is not acceptable for many kids. That's really what the public education system in California and elsewhere is doing. It's eliminating choice. The government has decided, contrary to practical considerations and the wishes of many parents, that students must be vaxxed and masked. The proper solution to this reality is a policy known as school choice. Parents who do not agree with these policies should be able to take whatever public funding is budgeted for their kids and invest it in an educational option that aligns with their needs and their values. Many school districts in large cities spend upwards of $20,000 a year on each student, this money coming from tax dollars, of course. So what if the school system simply gave that money to the families of each child and allowed them to spend $20,000 each on an educational option that works for them? After all, that's enough money to cover private tuition at many elite schools. Now, for some families, they could even spend the money enrolling their child in a school setting that follows stricter COVID-19 mitigation policies. Fine by me if that's what they want, but it should be their choice. The decision belongs to families, not the government. Currently, all parents and all kids have to abide by the same very heavy-handed policies. They want your kid to be vaccinated no matter what, and they're still going to make them wear masks outside while playing sports, in between bites of food in the cafeteria, and on, for no good reason, or for little good reason. Now, this week happens to be National School Choice Week, but the public education system's utter failure to handle the COVID pandemic in a manner that allows kids to actually attend school has provided a 2-year-long example of why this policy change is desperately needed. If parents want to vaccinate their kids, they should absolutely do that. If they want to send their kids to schools that require masks, they should do that as well. But the millions of parents who want to make a different choice, well, they have rights too. we can fund public education without expecting that every family, that every child should languish under the exact same restrictions for as long as the government says so. So I talked yesterday about my anti-masking fury, but it doesn't seem fair to me that kids right now are under the thumb of the most aggressive COVID restrictions. Like, most people don't have to wear masks outside. Like, you just don't have, it's not expected that when you go jogging, you wear masks. And yet these school policies are like, oh, you're playing soccer? Of course you have to keep a mask on. In between bites of food at the cafeteria. This isn't something we have to do at restaurants anymore. You have to wear a mask when you're in line ordering food for some reason. But once you sit down, you're no longer wearing a mask.
Yeah, the outdoor behavior, I think, is anomalous. The question about between bites of food, that is something that they still require you to do, rightly or wrongly, on an Amtrak or an airplane or something like that.
Well, don't get me started on airplane policies, but we still take our belts and shoes off on the airplane for no reason.
For no reason. But look, I do think that you're right, that these rules aren't being narrowly kind of tailored to what is required to keep people maximally safe. I think certainly playing outdoor activities, it's ridiculous. People have been being told for 2 years now that you're allowed to go running outside and do things like that without being masked. There's no safety issues there. I wonder, to give a good faith reading of what's going on in California, if because there are a lot of outdoor type school campuses, they're imagining scenarios where people are sitting outdoors, but in close quarters at an outdoor cafeteria table, picnic table situation, in close quarters talking to each other in a way that could undermine the goals of indoor masking if there really is all of that close quarter chit chat. However, your greater point stands, although I do not second you when it comes to the school choice argument.
Well, tell me how you feel about it.
Look, there are some social goods that when people individually divest from, it lowers the quality of the entire social good. So I don't see anybody making arguments about how if the police aren't responsive enough in your neighborhood, you can take your tax dollars and hire an individual private army to guard your house, or the fire department, or the roads aren't being paved in my neighborhood. Give me my tax dollars back and I'll take care of it myself. I don't support this war. Give me the tax dollars back and I'll buy my own arsenal from my own house. Well, I mean, maybe, but the reality is there's an understanding that the whole purpose of the federal government, to the extent that you might believe it should be limited, is to take care of these large systemic issues that aren't as well addressed on an individual basis. And I would argue that education is exactly one of those things. And when you look at the studies, people who withdraw, school choices cause there to be a significant drain of resources from a lot of particularly underserved and underfunded educational communities, and that enters to the detriment of all the students that are left behind.
Well, I'm fine with funding public education. You're right, we should provide public education. Not making that claim, but the public school system, I think, was doing a bad job even before the pandemic, but during the pandemic did an abysmally bad job. Just a wholesale, we will not in fact do this vital service, right? If it's like fire, if it's like police, if it's like the vital services, well, this was the one side that said we are just absolutely not going to do our jobs. It makes me think that, well, maybe all the funding that is being invested in this, why don't we just, why does the government have to provide the education? It can fund the education. We can just contract it to these other schools, other choices that are doing a better job doing it.
It's not cost effective. That's the thing. It is not as cost effective for me individually to say that I'm going to fund fire services for my house. They're not shared resources when any individual does it on their own. When we participate in a public school system, just like when we participate in any of the public goods in our country, we each pay a fraction of the cost that it would cost to individually educate my child, get a building for them to be educated in, hire a teacher and pay for their health insurance and pay them enough to be able to commute to work and the road and the infrastructure and all of those things. Individually, I can't provide those things. But if you and I and 10 and 50 and 30,
provide it.
Well, yes, but if you allow taxpayers then to withdraw their money from that base, what that does is it decreases the pool from people to draw from. It's like how insurance works.
Right.
To sit here and individually pay for every harm that befalls me over the course of my life would be extraordinarily expensive, which is why we have the idea that if we band together, we can spread the risks across the community. All of these big public systems operate this way, and while I would love it if it were the case that all the big brains have sat around and say it costs exactly $2,000 a week to educate a child maximally. Here's your $2,000. Go out in the world. You're going to be able to get exactly the same amount of benefit individually as you will in these communities. That's not the case. And while some parents, school districts are so bad that they're able to get some narrow advantage from leaving their school districts, I think every study will tell you that the problems with our schools are not necessarily funding, but taking funding out additionally is going to exacerbate the problems that already exist.
They get a lot of money. They just got even more money, the COVID money. I mean, this is a scientific amount, $1 gazillion in COVID relief funds that they're spending on. In some schools, obviously, had to make infrastructure changes or to deal with COVID for other reasons, but you can't say, well, and I guess you're not saying that. The school system is not, they get a lot of money. They get a lot of money. $20,000 per student is a lot of money. That would pay for like 4 years of tuition at a perfectly fine school in a lot of places in the country. It's more than 1 year's tuition at like a very elite high school.
Well, I mean, we have to
it's a lot of money.
Talk about the numbers there, but I think the reality is that I would agree with you that there needs to be some rehabilitation to the public school system. I would not agree that the answer is bailing on it altogether. And I agree with you, first and foremost, that some of these mask rules are not narrowly tethered to exactly what the kids need.
Well, that's all I wanted to hear. I appreciate that.
We're making some progress, Robby.
Making some progress. Well, I'm looking forward to what's on your radar coming up next.